This one is sorta apples to oranges, iPhone XS versus GoPro HERO 7 Black. Even pricing is drastically different, but I thought it'd be really fun and interesting to compare some of the hottest, latest, and greatest cameras out right now and see how they stack up. Now up front, let me be clear, I'm not comparing functionality. Yes, this iPhone can make phone calls, the GoPro cannot. Instead, we're solely comparing camera quality. Now I'm Ben from AuthenTech, and in today's video, we'll be testing 4K video, stabilization, audio, photos, HDR, and more. Let's dive right in. Now let's start with 4K 60 FPS on both. First, let's cover the obvious. The GoPro has an ultra wide angle lens, creating an immersive experience and squeezing plenty of landscape into frame. iPhone has a dual lens setup, one standard angle, the second telephoto. Now, dear Apple, please consider placing a third ultra wide angle lens like the LG V40 in your next iPhone. This would be fantastic and super helpful for not only action shots, but wide panoramas, time-lapse, indoor, and large groupie shots. The use cases are endless. Secondly, let's compare the colors, vibrancy, saturation, dynamic range, sharpness, and clarity. A few things I'm noticing. It looks like the colors and even the contrast is a bit more punchy on the GoPro. They both look really nice though, and sometimes even more similar than I thought they would. Not always, but sometimes. Both cameras are shooting 12 megapixel, and I really appreciate they both can record 4K video at 60 FPS. Also, check out that frame stuttering issue on the GoPro 7. I talked about this in my last GoPro videos, and I think it's the EIS, and I'm kinda surprised there's still no firmware update for this. I'm running the latest version at the time of this filming. Now, even though it's a little unfair to zoom way in and pixel peep because the GoPro is wide angle and the iPhone is not, it's still interesting to see the clarity and level of detail difference between the two. And this is an audio test on the iPhone XS, and this is audio on the GoPro HERO 7 Black. How's the audio sound? Let's live AuthenTech. Let's live AuthenTech. What do you guys think of the audio recording differences? The iPhone now records in stereo sound, which is a great feature. One last thing I noticed here on the iPhone, there seems to be some pixel blocking issue arise in the footage once in a while. Now, I'm not sure if this is a video compression or bitrate issue. Let me know if you see it and what you think might be causing it down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, let's jump into a 4K 30 stabilization test. Both cameras actually have some really impressive stabilization technologies. They both are looking really smooth and stable. The iPhone sometimes has this autofocus seeking issue, but again, GoPro doesn't even have autofocus, so it's a little bit of a wash. Here I'm scooting along on my electric unicycle and my eyes drawn to both sides. I like the closer up feeling on the iPhone where I can almost count the blades of grass as they go wisping by, and the blurred out background looks nice. But I also like the GoPro. It has that wide angle. We're able to see a lot more of the surrounding scenery and objects. Colors and dynamic range look really good, and overall the stability of frame looks uber smooth. Again, I'll mention it here as well. I think there's a time and place for each of these cameras, and both have unique traits and purposes. It's still fun and thought-provoking when we place them side by side to see how they stack up. We can also see the pros and cons of each and what they can learn from each other. This is 4K 30 FPS walking stabilization test. In this one, we can clearly make out that iPhone focusing issue, especially if I half-speed slow down. When I start jogging, the GoPro still produces nice, smooth-looking footage. As for the iPhone, it's this massive bug that needs fixing. The autofocus is searching all around, jello effect is basically ruining the shot. It looks horrendous. Now yes, I'm updated to the latest iOS, and quick Google search reveals I'm not alone on this. Parkour. Now if we jump back to 4K 60 walking stabilization test. Looks like that focusing issue is here as well, and when we pick it up to a jog, the GoPro simply blows the iPhone out of the water. Even its dynamic range looks better. This is one key area I'd love iPhone and other phone manufacturers to heavily devote some R&D resources into. EIS and OIS, it'll be a game changer when our phones can finally shoot gimbal-like videos and photos with no shake or wobbles. This is important for all peoples because 99% of people use their phone's camera while hand holding. And secondly, whether it's wide, medium, or telephoto lens, stabilization is vital. We can't forget some slow motion, and both cameras actually have similar specs. Both record up to 240 FPS at 1080p like seen here. Again, the GoPro's wide angle's nice for fitting that whole water fountain into the shot. The iPhone looks to have some more stuttering going on. As for sharpness and detail, though they look a bit similar, I think the GoPro takes it here. But again, let's remember it's sorta apples to oranges with the wide versus narrow field of view. Oh, and lastly, I've said it before, but I gotta say it again, I can't believe neither of these cameras shoot 480 FPS. Even the old OnePlus 6 can shoot that. And I really thought we'd have 1000 FPS by the end of 2018, but I'm way off. I think only Sony and Samsung have unlocked that milestone. As for a quick autofocus test, well, here you go. I'm kind of joking, but it nicely shows the difference. Autofocus and a narrow depth of field on the iPhone versus infinity focus set on the GoPro. Pros and cons to each. I just had to compare the differences between GoPro's new time warp, i.e. hyperlapse feature, versus iPhone's time-lapse feature. Granted, I'm on my electric unicycle here, so both cameras should look pretty stable, but I do think the GoPro looks higher quality and more buttery smooth. I hope to see iPhone and other phones compete better in this area. For a quick low light test, I started at 4K 60, and right off the bat, the iPhone seems to have some jacked up autofocusing issue again. As for GoPro, it simply looks noisy and grainy, and yes, that is with low light mode and Pro Tune turned on. On a positive note, the GoPro's white balance looks nice and clean and white. iPhone always leans a tad warmer. Switching to 4K 30, the iPhone does a much better job here. No autofocusing issues, stability and overall image looks better. As for GoPro, it's just too dark and noisy. I personally avoid shooting in low light with my GoPro. Now let's switch over to photography. Back to shooting in daylight, bright sunshine, high contrast scenes, lots of beautiful fall colors out there. Both cameras tout a fancy HDR system, and honestly, I'd say they both look pretty splendid. Colors and vibrancy pop off the screen. There's plenty of clarity and detail maintained in the bright highlights as well as the dark shadow areas. I believe the minimum focusing distance for the GoPro is around 12 inches or so. Anything closer and it'll be blurry. It's a fairly straightforward concept, but it's key to touch on here. The iPhone can accomplish macro-like shots where GoPro cannot. And another major difference is aperture and depth of field. With this iPhone, we're able to accomplish nice fall-off blur when focusing on nearby objects. With GoPro and infinity focus, just about everything close and far will be in focus. Now this is one of the key reasons why you can't easily shoot those cinematic-like shots on your GoPro. There's just no easy way of accomplishing a narrow depth of field. Now, I personally think if GoPro were to create a modular device that could somehow shoot both wide-angle action shots and more narrow, tight depth of field close-up shots, maybe a dual lens setup, now that'd be game changer. When it comes to photos, of course, I think the iPhone wins mostly overall, unless you need a wide angle. Even the dynamic range and overall crispiness looks more pleasant on the iPhone over the GoPro, but then again, does anyone shoot photos on their GoPro? Besides time-lapse, I never do. With medium to low lighting, iPhone performs pretty well, though has warmer tones. In extreme low light, iPhone gets pretty muddy, pixelated, and noisy. GoPro does a fairly okay job. Okay, so what does all of this mean? Well, here's a couple of my closing thoughts. First, I bought the iPhone for $1,250, GoPro $430. That's a big price difference. Battery life, I went out shooting for this camera test, both fully charged, and after about 1 hour, the GoPro was down to 50%. My iPhone is still at 79%. That's with both screens always on. Second, for durability, you probably wouldn't be jumping out of an airplane with your iPhone strapped to your head. There are specific uses for each device, obviously. I'm not saying GoPros or action cameras are totally obsolete. However, I do think that for a majority of people out there who might want to use an action camera for capturing your weekend family adventures or whatever, your phone's camera might just be good enough or even better than you think. Now, I'd love to see more phones adopt the wide-angle lens like LG, whom I love. Phones also need to work on better image stabilization, though it's getting better. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. What do you think the best use for action cams are? And what are the pros and cons you see in both? If you're new around here, consider subscribing for more camera and tech videos like this posted every week. And until next time, let's live AuthenTech.